We're not happy with where we're at, but by no means is the season over. We're 0-3. There's 14 left to play. We just got to go into this week preparing to get better and trying to get a win.
Through the first 3 weeks of the NFL season, I think the Cincinnati Bengals are one of the most surprising teams in the sport, that they are 0-3. They have not won a game so far, and that does not bode well for them in the historic context of teams making the postseason. Since 1990, 162 teams have opened the season 0-3, and only 4 of them have made the postseason, which is good for 2.5%. To take it a step further, of those 4 teams, only 2 wound up winning their division, which is 1.2%, and none of those teams have ever won the Super Bowl once they began 0-3. So obviously not a great start for the Bengals, but what are some of the positives you can take away from the first 3 weeks, and how did the Bengals even find themselves in this situation? I think you really got to go back to the last few years of the Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Burrow at the helm, and really how the Bengals have started slow every single season with him under center. The difference about this year, though, is he's not injured or dealing with some sort of ailment that is making him not play his best football to begin the season. You go to year number 2 with Joe Burrow. He was recovering from the severe knee injury he suffered as a rookie that made him miss a big bulk of that season. Burrow did not play well the first few weeks. The Bengals as a team started slow, but then really ramped things up and made a run for the division, even made the Super Bowl. In year number 3, Burrow had to get his appendix removed right before the start of the season. Again, it was a very slow start. I think he had like a 4 turnover performance against the Pittsburgh Steelers in week number 1. But again, the Bengals rallied, made it all the way to the AFC Championship game to have a rematch against the Kansas City Chiefs. And then again in year number 4, Burrow dealt with some calf tightness. He missed most of training camp. He couldn't play in the preseason. And the first few weeks of that year, you could see that his mobility was not the same. He was not able to get as much power behind his throws because of this injury. And once again, what happened? Burrow and the Bengals started slow and had to dig themselves out of a hole. And things were actually going pretty well until Burrow suffered another injury on prime time against the Baltimore Ravens, which ended yet another season prematurely for Joe Burrow. And again, heading into this season, there were still questions if the Bengals were going to start slow or how Joe Burrow was going to perform off of his severe wrist surgery that he had to get. And I can't say that Burrow's been playing bad when you compare it to really the past couple of years that I just went over. Burrow's been performing relatively pretty good. Even against the Washington Commanders this past Monday, he had maybe his best game of the season, over 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. He did not turn the ball over. He looked like the normal Joe Burrow that we're used to seeing. As an offense, the Bengals put up 33 points, but it was the defense that really struggled to get off the field and limit the Commanders, and the rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels, who had a breakout performance. But I don't want to put all the blame on the Bengals defense, because although it was not good against Washington, you go back to week number 1 against the New England Patriots, and the defense played a really good game. The issue in that game was the Bengals offense that could only score 10 points against who many saw going into the season as one of the worst teams in the league. Now in that game, there were some underlying factors like the drama regarding Jamar Chase, because he had not practiced really all of training camp. T. Higgins also did not suit up in the game due to his hamstring injury, so there were some conditions why this Bengals offense was not super productive in that game, but I still do not think that's a good enough excuse for why the Bengals only were able to score 1 touchdown and Burrow was unable to even pass for 200 yards. I think that's where you really have to put some blame on the shoulders of Zach Taylor and not really getting this team ready to play for week number 1, because we've seen this now time and time again. It's not something new that's just appearing this season. And the fact that the offense can look so unprepared in week number 1, then against the Kansas City Chiefs in week number 2, the team looks really good, like a Super Bowl caliber team. And then in week number 3, it's the defense that struggles. It's not the offense this time. It really makes you raise the question, what is really wrong with this Bengals team and how can they fix these issues as the bulk of the season is still ahead of them? I really do think offensively now we will see the Bengals kind of get into a rhythm. T. Higgins, he is back from his injury. Jamar Chase, he's kind of put the drama and the contract situation behind him. Joe Burrow didn't look like he had all of his confidence to start the season, but I feel like he's still getting that back, and as the season progresses, it's only going to continue to rise. I think the offensive line has been fine. Trent Brown did suffer a knee injury. He's going to be out for the rest of the season, but that's why the Bengals invested in Amarius Mims with their first round pick, so I'm not really concerned about the offensive line either. And yeah, Joe Mixon was shipped off in free agency, but I do feel like Chase Brown and Zach Moss have done a pretty serviceable job so far, and you really haven't seen the huge loss of Mixon quite yet. So I think this Bengals offense is really going to hit its groove in the next couple of weeks and still emerge as one of the best units in the league. I'm really more concerned about the defense at this point, and more importantly, the defensive line. The Bengals have not been able to get a ton of pressure after opposing quarterbacks, and they've been one of the worst run defenses in the entire league. I think a part of that is they did get weaker on the interior of their defensive line. They let go of DJ Reader, who went to the Detroit Lions this offseason. He was known as one of the best run stoppers in the entire league. He was getting up there in age a little bit. He was suffering a lot of injuries in the past couple of years, so I do understand the Bengals wanting to move on from him and not wanting to pay him a big lucrative contract. But so far, Sheldon Rankins and BJ Hill, who were supposed to step up this year, have only had 3 combined solo tackles the beginning of the season. That's just not going to be acceptable from your interior defensive line. And because of that, the Bengals are allowing around 150 rush yards per game. And we saw it in week number 1 with Ramondre Stevenson for the Patriots just running all over the Bengals. I mean, they had more rush yards than passing yards in the year 2024. You do not see a team winning many games when they have more rush yards than they do passing yards. So that was a major red flag that we saw in week number 1. But then again, against the Kansas City Chiefs, we saw it again. The Chiefs almost had 150 yards. They averaged 4.7 yards per carry. That's just not good enough. On a positive note, they did have their best run defense game of the season so far against the Commanders, only allowing them to rush for 3.4 yards per carry. So that is a pretty big improvement. But then you just look at the stat sheet and Jaden Daniels completed 21 of 23 passes. So again, the run defense took a step forward and then the pass defense takes a step back. So I think the biggest step forward for the Bengals the rest of the season has to be to make their defense a little bit more reliable. And I do think that's going to be a little bit challenging because the Bengals have lost some of the better players on that unit this offseason. They lost their cornerback, one from a season ago, in Chidobe Awuzie. You combine that with your best run stopper on the defensive line, and the Bengals are really relying on a lot of either longtime veteran players or some young assets across the board on defense. And Lou Anarumo is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. I do think that is pretty universally known. But when you have people that can't cover down the field and you don't have people that play their gaps correctly on the defensive line, it's not really going to work regardless of what scheme that you have. You have to have players that can win and man-on-man coverage, like the last play of Terry McLaurin down the right sideline in the end zone, the dagger touchdown. Anarumo did his job. He brought a blitz. He got a free rusher on Jaden Daniels, but he just made a perfect pass. And Dax Hill just got beat. So at the end of the day, the defense, I do think, is not going to be as good as it has been the past couple of years. I mean, there is still some talent across the board, like Mike Hilton in the secondary. I really like. I even like Geno Stone, who came over from Baltimore. Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard is still a nice pass rush duo off the edge. You have Jermaine Pratt, you have Logan Wilson at linebacker. But in a couple of key spots on the defense, like having a nice run stuffer and a lockdown corner, it has been pretty apparent through the first 3 weeks that the Bengals are missing those 2 pieces. But if they can get some overall improvement from this defense, I do still think the Bengals have a good chance to make the playoffs. Really, the silver lining for this whole thing is that the Bengals have been here, and they've been here time and time again in recent memory, and that's really only going to help them get out of this hole. I think what also helps is that they do have a 4th place schedule because of how they finished the season last year. That's going to be another benefit for them down the stretch. Now, early on, they did have one of those 4th place games against the New England Patriots, which they should have won that game. But like this week, they had the Carolina Panthers, then they have the New York Giants in 2 weeks. They've also got the Tennessee Titans late in the season as well. Those have turned into must-win games if the Bengals do want to find themselves in the playoffs. We know how competitive the AFC North is, and really every team outside of the Steelers has gotten off to a pretty slow start. The Ravens, that are 1-2, the Browns are 1-2. I don't think they're going to be very good this year. So the season is not lost by any stretch of the imagination. I would actually still pick the Bengals to make the playoffs because of how many teams in the AFC have gotten off to a bad start. I mean, currently, if the season ended today, the Las Vegas Raiders would be the number 7 seed and the Miami Dolphins would be the 8 seed. Both of those teams are 1-2, and the Raiders starting quarterback is Gardner Minshew, and the Dolphins starting quarterback is, well, we don't even know currently. So is it fair to say that the Bengals will not be able to get the number 1 or 2 seed because of the Bills and the Chiefs and their fast start? I do think it's fair to say that, but to rule this team out from being able to win their division or even make the playoffs, I do think it's a little bit of a stretch at this point, just because they have a superstar quarterback, they have weapons all across the board on offense, they have some key pieces here and there on defense, and the schedule is honestly just not too hard. So I definitely see the path for the Bengals to still make the postseason. And then once you're in the tournament, really anything can happen. And I think the Bengals from 2021 show us that. But I want to know what you think about the Cincinnati Bengals, and if you do believe in them to get out of this 0-3 hole. Do you still think they have a realistic chance to make the playoffs, or do you think the Bengals season is pretty much over? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But subscribe to the channel if you are new. Drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next one.